while in the east, after the end of the Warring States period, Qin Shi Huang and the Qin dynasty were an absolute power. 221 BCE to 206 BCE, Qin was determined to turn diverse China into a unified Chinese empire. He divided the lands into 36 command areas, supervised by a governor, military commander, and imperial inspector. It was expected that you followed the will of Qin, or else you would face harsh penalties. The basic ideas of legalism in action, strong government, harsh laws, and inheriting knowing that humans were necessarily selfish. However, their mandate from heaven ran quite quickly. After Qin Shi Huang's death, China was in turmoil with another dynasty on foot. Liu Bang, leader from 206 to 195 BCE, after leading a revolt against the Qin, was declared emperor of the new Han dynasty. Instead of following the strict legalistic mindset of the Qin, Liu decided to set his empire as a Confucianist paradise. The ideals of moderation, virtue, and piety, as set through Confucianism, were marched throughout the empire, weaving the cocoon of a powerful dynasty. During the Han dynasty, the production of silk was ever increasing, and the idea of profits was in the minds of all. So in 138 BCE, Emperor Han Wu sent an imperial convoy to make contact with cultures of Central Asia and the Mediterranean. Then after the routes were established, Chinese merchants and traders would bring their silk across the Silk Road to the Middle East and eventually Europe, where it would be sold at high profits, though in the beginning the route was relatively short. Because in 97 BC, Ambassador Khan Ying was sent to Rome with gifts of silk for their empire. However, Khan only got as far as Mesopotamia because he was told by the Parthians, the dominant empire in Iran at the time, that the journey would take years. Little did Khan know that he was misinformed, that the journey would have been relatively shorter, but the Parthians wanted to keep their spot as the middlemen. They did not want China and Rome to have contact with one another, creating a system of three empires smushed right up against each other: Rome in the west, Parthians in the center, and China in the east. Then in 86 BCE, Greece, already being weakened by the conquest of Alexander the Great, was now the target of the Roman Empire. General Lucius Cornelius Sulla led an army of legions to the forefront of Athens. He besieged Athens for several months, brutally torturing the citizens within. Eventually, when Athens fell, he ordered his soldiers to loot and pillage the city, destroying many important cultural treasures. This takeover cemented Rome as a superpower. Athens no longer had the power, but rather it was in Rome. While in 63 BCE, General Pompey was tasked with capturing Jerusalem and the region of Galilee, the Romans quickly captured the cities, forcing Galilee to be placed under Roman rule, including a small village called Nazareth. The Romans' desire to expand didn't end in Galilee though. In 58 BCE, Julius Caesar was appointed governor of the Roman Province of Sicilian Gaul, northern Italy, with the express assignment of conquering the rest of the Gauls. At the time, the Gauls were a group of Celtic peoples who lived in that area that is now France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. However, it was Caesar's job to take over these Celtic tribes, while the Gauls, who were insistent on their independence, all had to work together under the leadership of Vercingetorix in a last-ditch attempt to stop the Romans. As Caesar brought his troops to Alesia in 52 BC, war was upon us. Alesia was surrounded by a double wall and a ditch, with additional fortifications on the town's hills. Vercingetorix had gathered a large force of Gallic warriors inside the town. In contrast, Caesar had assembled a sizable Roman army outside the walls. Caesar realized that a direct assault on the town would be complex, so he surrounded the Gallic forces and starved them into submission. He ordered the construction of a series of fortifications around Alesia, including a circumvallation wall that encircled the town, and a second wall and ditch that faced outward to defend against any attempts to break out. Over several weeks, Caesar's forces engaged in a grueling siege of Alesia, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Gallic warriors inside the town made several attempts to break out, but they were repelled by the Roman forces. The tide of the battle turned in favor of the Romans when a second Gallic army, led by Vercingetorix's ally Commius, attempted to relieve the siege. Caesar sent a detachment of his forces to intercept the Gallic reinforcements. After a fierce battle, the Roman soldiers emerged victorious. With his forces surrounded and facing starvation, Vercingetorix was forced to surrender. He emerged from Alesia and offered himself as a prisoner to Caesar, effectively ending the Gallic resistance to Roman rule. Throughout the next 2 years, Caesar crossed the Gallic Empire, conquering and implementing it into Rome. The Gauls were implemented into Rome, even gaining citizenship within the empire. However, the Senate was not happy with Caesar. Even though he had great success against the Gauls, the Roman Senate wanted him to stop. They did not like the popularity Caesar was gaining, nor the power he was controlling. So the Roman Senate called upon Caesar to resign his command and disband his army, or risk being declared an enemy of the state. This led Caesar to an essential choice to make. Will he either follow the will of the Roman Senate or ignore them and start a bloody civil war? Roman law at the time prohibited any general from crossing the Rubicon River and entering mainland Italy with a standing army without the expressed permission of the Roman Senate. To do so would be treason, and this tiny stream would reveal Caesar's intentions and mark the point of no return. Civil war was imminent as Caesar and his army marched over the Rubicon. Battles in Corfinium and Pharsalus showed the Senate that Caesar was a worthy foe, so the Roman Senate appointed his son-in-law, Gnaeus Pompey, to lead the Roman forces against his father-in-law. Both parties knew the importance of Spain, due to it providing a link between Italy and the rest of Europe. The two armies clashed near the town of Leda in northeastern Spain. Caesar's army was significantly outnumbered, but he could use his superior military tactics and training to gain the upper hand in the battle. After several days of intense fighting, Caesar emerged victorious, forcing Pompey's forces to retreat, declaring Caesar as the new leader of Rome. When Caesar made it back to Rome, the crowds were chanting, "Hail Caesar! Hail Caesar!" The people then decided that he would be the dictator of Rome for life. Caesar immediately set to work, implementing a series of reforms and policies aimed at improving ordinary Romans' lives and strengthening the central government's power. He ordered the construction of new infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and aqueducts, which helped to connect different parts of the city and improve trade and commerce. Caesar also enacted a series of political and social reforms, including granting citizenship to many people living in the Roman Empire and creating new laws and customs that were based on Roman practices. He encouraged the spread of the Latin language and culture throughout the city and established the Julian calendar, which is the basis of the calendar we use today. However, Caesar's reign was short-lived because 2 years later, in 44 BC, he was stabbed to death by two loyal senators, Cassius and Brutus. The assassination of Caesar led the Roman world into disarray. The world was filled with factions, vying for government control without a strong leader. Octavian, Caesar's son, who was 18 then, came to Rome to claim his inheritance and assert his place in the political landscape. He quickly aligned himself with Caesar's loyal lieutenant, Mark Antony. Together, they defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. However, tensions soon arose between Octavian and Antony as both men vied for control of the Roman Empire. In 31 BCE, their forces clashed in the naval battle of Actium, which resulted in Octavian emerging as the clear victor. Antony fled to Egypt with his lover, Cleopatra, and the two committed suicide the following year. With Antony's defeat, Octavian emerged as the undisputed ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, he was appointed Augustus and became the first Roman emperor. During Augustus's reign, a man who would change the world was born in the Roman-occupied city of Bethlehem, Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Luke says, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town." Luke 2:1-3. This census was an essential factor in Roman society, because it established the population counts in these various communities, making it possible to tax these various citizens. So the highly pregnant Mary and her betrothed husband Joseph had to travel 90 miles on foot from Nazareth to Bethlehem to complete this legally required Roman census. When they arrived in Bethlehem, many other descendants of the King of David, or members of the Jewish faith, were also going to Bethlehem for the census. They found out that there was no room for them in the inn, so they were forced to take shelter in a stable where Mary gave birth to Jesus. Jesus was later named King of the Jews. After Jesus' birthday and the completion of the census, Mary and Joseph returned to Nazareth with their extraordinary son. As the years of Jesus went on, stories about him grew. More and more followers began to worship Jesus as their Messiah. They claim that he can catch an endless amount of fish. They claim that he can cure the blind, and they claim that he was the Son of God. So these followers, specifically his disciples, started to write down his entire life journey. 4 of his closest disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wrote down the main chunks of the book in these parts called Gospels. Each of these Gospels covered almost all of the same events, the narrative life of Jesus Christ. This narrative testimony of a child born in a stable changed the world forever. Even though many loved Jesus, some viewed him as a threat. Emperor Tiberius succeeded Augustus and reigned from 14 AD to 37 AD. Tiberius was notorious for his delators, a network of informants rewarded for spying and reporting on suspected traitors and criminals. Criminals reported on by the delators had to face a treason trial, often resulting in executions or forced suicides. His prefect of Judea at the time, Pontius Pilate, was no stranger to the harsh punishment of traitors. As Jesus was influencing more and more people, he became more of a political threat. So, following the guidelines of Emperor Tiberius, Pilate was given no practical political choice other than to execute Jesus on the cross. Roman law was evident then. One must follow the emperor's will or else they will perish. As Jesus was crucified on the cross, a new religion was born: Christianity. In the beginning, Christianity was just a small sect of Judaism. Nevertheless, its growth would be unparalleled. Paul of Taurus would take the word of his chosen Lord across the known world. From Greece to Turkey to Syria, the word of Jesus Christ spread. His missionary tales are now documented in the New Testament as the Book of Acts. The more Paul went to different places, the more followers he gained. On the same token, it created more enemies. The divide between monotheism and polytheism was on the rise. It was beginning to get a lot tougher for Romans to accept a religious population that didn't believe in gods like Mars and Jupiter. So when the Great Fire of Rome occurred in July of 64 AD, Emperor Nero quickly blamed it on the Christians. The Great Fire was an event that destroyed 2/3 of the city of Rome. So, in order to pay for these massive repairs, Nero instituted heavy tributes across the empire. To meet at least a proportion of the costs, Nero also started to print more Roman currency, creating an inflationary effect for the first time in the empire's history. However, the individuals who lived under Roman rule, which wasn't in Rome proper, were upset by this new policy. So, in the holy city of Jerusalem in 66 AD, a revolt was on. At first, the first Jewish revolt succeeded, and the Jewish forces quickly expelled the unprepared Roman army. Then, the rebels gained some traction in the neighboring villages in Galilee. In response, the Roman Emperor Nero sent the general Vespasian to meet the Jewish forces, an endeavor that pushed most rebels into Jerusalem proper by the time Vespasian was proclaimed emperor in 69 CE. Then, around Passover in 70 AD, Vespasian and his forces sieged the city, depleting it of food and water within the walls of Jerusalem. The Jews started to quarrel within, leaving them more vulnerable to attack. By August, the Romans breached the defenses, killed much of the population, and destroyed many of their holy sites. With the Jews decimated, the strength of polytheism lived long. Then, in 98 to 117 AD, under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire was able to expand its greatest territorial extent, spanning all the way from modern-day Britain to the Persian Gulf. Roman rule was everywhere. Well, except for in the Americas, because the Romans didn't even know they existed. In the Americas, we can see the growth of various civilizations across the Andes located in modern-day Peru and Chile. The Mochi civilization was able to build monumental structures, like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, impressive pyramids that were the center of their religions. They also created advanced fertilization techniques that used bird droppings as fertilizer, Their highly centralized government made everyone know their place in society. While a little bit more south, the Nazca civilization is one enthralled in mystery. The people of Nazca created a series of large-scale geoglyphs consisting of hundreds of individual figures, including geometric shapes, animals, and human-like figures, by removing the dark reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles covering the surface of the Nazca Desert. These lines are now called Nazca lines, the purpose of which is still unknown to this day and subject to conspiracy theory today. Around 100 AD, the Zapotecs started establishing Monte Alban, their capital. It was one of the first examples of urban planning in the Americas. The city was laid out in a grid pattern, with main roads and smaller side streets leading to plazas and public buildings. The city was also divided into different districts, each with specialized functions, such as residential, administrative, and religious, leaving it to be in use for 1,000 years after that. While back in Rome, after the end of Trajan's reign in 117 AD, a new emperor with a purpose was in hand. Hadrian was a man tasked with a near impossible: keeping the massive Roman Empire under one rule. He first had to deal with a crisis with the newly colonized Roman Britain. Like their predecessors in Judea, the Roman Brits did not like being Roman, so they started to cause unrest, and in the eyes of Hadrian, a real threat of revolution was on his mind. So Hadrian had ordered a massive wall, aptly named Hadrian's Wall, which spanned almost coast to coast, keeping it sunk in the conquered people's minds that the Romans were here, staving off revolution in one region. However, in Galilee, things weren't as peaceful. Simon Bar Kokhba led a rebellion of the Jewish people to free themselves from Roman rule. As you see, Rome was developing a new city called Aelia Capitolina over the ruins of Jerusalem, from the last revolt with temples dedicated to polytheistic gods like Jupiter. By 132, Bar Kokhba took the bottle of Nasi, head of state. Many Jews regarded him as the Messiah who would save the Jewish people and restore their independence. Kokhba's troops would storm Aelia Capitolina, almost knocking out entirely the Roman garrison controlling the city. Hadrian, though, would not have it. So he sent a force of 120,000 men to the lands of Judea to conquer and force the Jewish people into submission. As Cassius Dio says in the History of Rome, 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. History of Rome 69.14, 1-2. Rome made it clear that it was not to be taken lightly.